COVID's brought a lot of change. And as we move out of COVID, there's going to be a lot of change on our churches as well. And we thought it'd be a helpful tool to run through John Cotter's framework, his 8-step framework on leading change. The first step in John Cotter's framework of leading change is building a sense of urgency. Now, as Christians, we have an urgency because Jesus is going to return, and we want to keep building that sense of urgency for evangelism in our churches. But the reason you would build a sense of urgency for change in any organisation is to just create a level of stress that makes change productive. Now, with COVID coming in, we don't need to raise the temperature so much. People are already at a heightened level of stress. And so in this sense, we're not building a sense of urgency. It's already here. We want to be thinking about how we pass to the flock in this step by lowering the temperature and empathizing with them where they're at. The second step in Cotter's framework for leading change is creating a guiding coalition. You don't want to move people through change on your own. And so we want to gather people, whether that's staff members or key leaders, to get them on board to guide the change through our church. There's not something we might have a tendency to do this as individuals, but we want to bring people into this process as we lead our whole church through change. The third step in the framework is develop a vision and strategy, because we want to help people see where we're going and what it's going to be like. What are the goals that we have through this next season and the next 2 or 3 years? And then we want to plan that out for people of how we're going to do that. This is where the now, where, how tool is actually really helpful in thinking about how we can develop a vision and strategy. The fourth step in the framework is communicating the change vision. This is where a lot of people fail. They might come up with a vision, but then fail to communicate the vision of change to multiple stakeholders within the church. So thinking about, how will I communicate this differently to my staff, and then differently to my key leaders, and then differently to the whole church? But then what are the different ways or places that I could communicate this change and this vision? Through our small groups, through our preaching on Sundays, maybe through particular events and key moments in the life of the church where we want to communicate where we're going. The fifth step in the framework is empower broad-based action. We want to keep pushing responsibility down in our churches to empower others for works of service. We want to be handing over responsibility for our ministries and how we're going to implement change. And when there's a crisis and when there's lots of change and uncertainty, our tendency as leaders is going to be to get in and make all the decisions and do all the ministry. But that's not who God has called us to be. He's called us to equip the saints for works of service. And so as we lead our people back out of COVID, we want to be thinking, how can I empower others to be doing this ministry and re-engaging church to be on God's mission? The sixth step in the framework is to then generate short-term wins. This is just the idea of how are we going to gather momentum as we head out of COVID? What are the things that we can celebrate and show people how great this is, that we're heading in the right direction? Things to celebrate are going to be when we regather physically. We want to really celebrate that moment where we get to gather in physical presence as God's people all together. Or it could be that we celebrate the new people that have joined church over COVID, or the new people that are joining a church, or the new Christians, the people that have become Christians through this change. So I want to think about how, as we lead people through this change, how we're going to generate those short-term wins to celebrate them with our church. The seventh step is then consolidating gains to be able to produce more change as needed. This is the kind of idea of ongoing refinement and sharpening the saw as we go. And as we move out of COVID, there's going to be this tension that we have. We're going to provide people stability and direction as we move out of COVID. But we want to do so in a way that still provides us with flexibility to tack and change as needed as we keep being on about God's mission as His people. Cotter's final step is then anchoring new approaches in the culture of the organisation, so within our church. How are we going to make these changes, these positive changes, part of our shared behaviour? We want to keep a shared language and continuity as we celebrate stories and maintain consistency and alignment and involvement for the changes that we've made. An example of this, we're going to be thinking about how we embed kind of online resources more into our training and also maybe kind of outreach as a church. So there's Cotter's 8 steps for leading people through change, and there's some helpful steps in there for us to think about as we lead people out of COVID for our church.